first on scene, he wasn't moving.
Okay, step aside, please. We need that stretcher up here now.
It was 6:49 p.m. on a clear Saturday evening when everything went wrong on Interstate 85. Traffic slowed to a crawl as drivers passed twisted metal, shattered glass, and flashing hazard lights reflecting off the asphalt. On the shoulder of the highway, a black man in blood-stained gym clothes was kneeling beside a wrecked Honda Civic, his hands pressed firmly against the head of an unconscious white woman slumped in the driver's seat. Blood ran through his fingers, soaked into his shirt, and pooled on the ground beneath him. Her breathing was shallow. Her pulse was fading. If the pressure stopped, she would bleed out in minutes. That was the moment a state trooper stepped out of his cruiser and saw something he thought he understood. "Step away from the vehicle." The officer shouted, his hand already near his weapon, hands where I can see them. "Now." The man looked up, calm but urgent, never lifting his hands from the wound. "I can't," he said. "If I let go, she could die." To the trooper, it didn't look like life-saving medical care. It looked like a civilian interfering with an accident scene. A black man in gym clothes, covered in blood, touching an unconscious white woman. The officer didn't ask what the man was doing. He didn't ask what training he had. He didn't ask how long the woman had been bleeding. Seconds later, as traffic crept past and bystanders watched in shock, metal handcuffs snapped shut around the wrists of the man who was keeping her alive. What the officer didn't know what would turn this roadside arrest into a national scandal was that the man he had just handcuffed was not a bystander. He was the chief of emergency medicine. That man's name was Dr. Isaiah Carter, 41 years old, chief of emergency medicine at Memorial Regional Medical Center. He wasn't just a doctor. He was the person who ran the emergency department when chaos arrived. 50 physicians reported directly to him. More than 200 nurses worked under his supervision. Every year, over 80,000 patients passed through the ER he managed. Isaiah was board-certified in emergency medicine, an advanced trauma life support instructor. The kind of physician other doctors trained under when they needed to learn how to keep people alive in the worst moments imaginable. For 15 years, he had treated penetrating trauma, massive head injuries, cardiac arrests, strokes, every crisis that came through an emergency room door. He had personally handled more than 40,000 emergency cases. He taught trauma protocols that had become standard practice across the region. Under his leadership, mortality rates in his department dropped because he redesigned how critical patients were assessed in the first minutes that decide whether someone lives or dies. This was not someone guessing what to do on the side of a highway. This was someone whose entire career was built on recognizing life-threatening injuries in seconds, making decisions under pressure, and acting without hesitation. When accidents happened, when sirens were still minutes away, Isaiah Carter was exactly the person you wanted kneeling beside you, but standing on that highway, in gym clothes instead of scrubs, covered in blood instead of wearing a white coat. None of that mattered, because in that moment, his experience didn't look like authority. It looked like suspicion. Just an hour earlier, there had been nothing extraordinary about Isaiah Carter's day. He finished his workout at the gym shortly after 6, towel over his shoulder, phone in his hand, already thinking about dinner at home. His wife would have food waiting. His kids would want to talk about school. After years of night shifts and trauma calls, weekends like this were rare and precious. At Chasse 13 p.m., Isaiah pulled onto Interstate 85. Taking the same route home he'd driven hundreds of times before. Traffic was steady but calm. The spring evening was clear. The road dry. Visibility perfect. Then, miles ahead. Brake lights flared all at once. Cars slowed abruptly. Drivers swerved. Smoke rose above the concrete barrier. Isaiah didn't need sirens to know what had happened. He saw the angle of the vehicles. The debris scattered across lanes. The way traffic suddenly compressed, his mind shifted automatically into trauma mode. As he crept closer, he saw two vehicles badly damaged. One pinned against the median. Another disabled across the right lane. A woman slumped motionless behind a deployed airbag. A man staggering out of a truck. Clutching his chest. Struggling to breathe. Bystanders stood frozen at a distance. Phones out. Unsure whether to help or wait, Isaiah didn't hesitate. He pulled onto the shoulder, threw on his hazard lights, and reached into his trunk for the medical bag he always kept there. Gloves, gauze, bandages, trauma shears, the basics he'd carried for years, just in case. He ran toward the wreck and called out loudly, clearly, so everyone could hear. "I'm Dr. Rend, Isaiah Carter, Emergency Medicine. I'm here to help." And with that, the man who would soon be handcuffed for saving a life went to work. Isaiah reached the Honda Civic first. The driver was a woman in her late 20s. Unconscious. Slumped forward against a deflated airbag. A deep laceration ran along her scalp. Torn open where her head had struck the window during the impact. Blood poured freely, soaking her hair collar, the seat beneath her. Isaiah checked her airway clear. Her breathing was shallow and irregular. He found her pulse at the neck rapid. Weak. Tachycardia. Her body was trying to compensate for massive blood loss. Shock was already setting in. Every second mattered. Isaiah pulled on gloves and applied direct pressure to the wound with thick gauze from his bag. The blood soaked through almost instantly. He added more gauze, pressed harder, and adjusted his hand placement to compress the bleeding vessel beneath the skin. The mechanism of injury told him something else. High-speed impact, head strike, possible cervical spine injury. Moving her, even slightly, could cause paralysis. So, he didn't. He stabilized her exactly where she was, keeping her head still, maintaining pressure, elevating her legs just enough to improve blood flow to her brain without compromising her spine. He spoke to her continuously, even though she didn't respond, monitoring her breathing, her pulse, her color. Without intervention, she would bleed to death before the ambulance arrived. Then a bystander rushed toward him, panic in his voice. "There's another man," he said. "He says he can't breathe. He's holding his chest." Isaiah looked up, assessed the scene in one glance, and understood immediately. This was no longer one critical patient. It was two, and he was the only physician there. Isaiah shifted his focus without ever removing his hand from the woman's head wound. A few yards away, a man in his early 50s sat on the pavement beside a disabled pickup truck. He was pale, drenched in sweat, clutching his chest with both hands as if trying to hold himself together. His breathing was fast and shallow, his eyes wide with fear. Isaiah called out to him firmly but calmly. "Sir, are you having chest pain?" The man nodded. "Yes." He gasped. "Crushing. My left arm. I can't breathe." "Do you have a heart condition?" Isaiah asked. "Are you on medication?" "Yes," the man said. "Struggling for air. Heart problems. I take meds." Isaiah didn't need more information. The signs were unmistakable. Possible myocardial infarction. A heart attack either caused the crash or was triggered by it. Either way, The risk of sudden cardiac arrest was real and immediate. Now Isaiah was managing two life-threatening emergencies at the same time. With one hand, he maintained constant pressure on the woman's bleeding scalp, preventing catastrophic blood loss. With his voice and eyes, he monitored the man with chest pain, instructing him to stay still, to breathe slowly, to avoid any movement that could trigger collapse. He directed bystanders with precision. You call 911 again. Tell them we have two critical patients. Head trauma with major bleeding. Possible heart attack. You stay with him. Keep him calm. Don't let him stand. This was triage in its rawest form. Limited resources. Multiple dying patients. No room for hesitation. Isaiah watched the woman's pulse weaken under his fingers. He watched the man's breathing grow more labored by the second. Help was coming, but not fast enough. So Isaiah did what emergency physicians are trained to do when the system hasn't arrived yet. He became the system. At Shasa Patruzeci Noapa. M. The first state police cruiser pulled onto the shoulder. Troopers David Mitchell and Sarah Connolly stepped out and took in the scene in seconds. Two wrecked vehicles. A crowd of bystanders. A man sitting on the ground clutching his chest, and a black man in basketball shorts and a sweat-soaked t-shirt kneeling beside an unconscious white woman. His hands pressed to her bleeding head. Blood was everywhere. To Isaiah, it was a medical emergency. To the troopers, it looked like chaos that needed to be controlled. Sir, step away from the vehicle. Mitchell shouted as he approached. Hands where I can see them. Isaiah didn't look up. He couldn't afford to. Officer, I'm Dr. Isaiah Carter, he said calmly. Emergency medicine. She has a severe head injury and major blood loss. If I stop pressure before EMS arrives, she could die. Mitchell saw gym clothes, not scrubs. He saw blood, not credentials. He saw a civilian touching a victim, not a physician performing life-saving care. Step back now. Mitchell repeated, his tone harder. Let the professionals handle it. Isaiah's jaw tightened. I am the professional, he said. My medical license is in my wallet. I can show you. I can have my hospital verify my credentials right now. But I cannot remove my hands from this wound. Trooper Connolly circled behind him. Scanning the scene. You're not in medical attire, she said. We need to see identification. Isaiah glanced at his blood-soaked clothes, then back at the woman whose life depended on him. I was driving home from the gym, he said. That doesn't change what she needs to survive. But the troopers had already made their assessment, and it had nothing to do with medicine. Sirens finally cut through the noise of traffic. At Shasa Sinchizech, Chitre played. M. The ambulance pulled up behind the cruisers. Lights flashing. Two paramedics jumped out with equipment and rushed toward the Civic. For the first time in minutes, Isaiah felt a flicker of relief. We've got it from here, one of them said. As they approached, Isaiah looked up, still holding pressure. I'm Dr. Dodd. Isaiah Carter. Emergency medicine, he said quickly. Female. Late 20s. Severe scalp laceration. Significant blood loss. Tachycardic. Signs of shock. I've maintained direct pressure for 9 minutes. Possible cervical spine injury given mechanism. The paramedic paused, surprised by the precision of the report, then nodded. Okay, we'll take over. Carefully, Isaiah transferred pressure to the paramedic's hands, making sure it was secure before stepping back. He immediately pointed toward the other victim. There's a second patient, he said. Male. Around 50. Chest pain. Cardiac history. Shortness of breath. Possible myocardial infarction. He needs cardiac monitoring right away. The paramedics moved fast. They didn't ask for Isaiah's credentials. They didn't confirm his title. They treated him as a well-informed bystander and focused on their patients. Behind them, Trooper Mitchell watched closely. He saw Isaiah stand up tall, of calm, covered in blood that wasn't his. He saw that the paramedics hadn't vouched for him, hadn't confirmed he was a doctor, hadn't escorted him to the ambulance. Something, in Mitchell's mind, still didn't sit right. "Sir," he called out, "I need you to come over here. We need to talk about your involvement." Isaiah turned, confused but compliant. "I've shown you my license," he said. "You can call my hospital, Memorial Regional. I'm the chief of emergency medicine there. These patients are going to my ER." Mitchell didn't reach for his phone. He reached for his cuffs. "Turn around," he said. "Hands behind your back." Isaiah froze. What he asked, "You're arresting me. You're being detained for impersonating a medical professional and interfering with emergency services." As the metal cuffs closed around his wrists, the ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren wailed, and the patients Isaiah had just saved were driven away to the hospital he ran without him. Isaiah sat in the back of the patrol car, his hands cuffed in front of him, streaked with drying blood that still smelled like iron and antiseptic. Through the window, he watched the ambulance disappear down the highway, its red lights fading into traffic. Those patients were being taken to Memorial Regional Medical Center. His hospital, his emergency department, the trauma bays he had designed, the doctors he supervised, and he wasn't there. At Chapta Census Prezice. M. Isaiah was processed at the state police barracks, photographed, fingerprinted, still wearing blood-stained gym clothes, still with the woman's blood beneath his fingernails. He asked to make a phone call to the hospital. He was told to wait. 30 minutes passed before anyone spoke to him. Finally, Detective Lieutenant Sandra Williams entered the interview room and sat across from him, a thin file already open on the table. "Mr. Carter," she said, "you were detained for possible impersonation of medical personnel. Explain what you were doing at the accident scene." Isaiah inhaled slowly, forcing his anger down. "It's Dr. Carter," he said evenly. "I'm a licensed emergency physician, chief of emergency medicine at Memorial Regional Medical Center. I stopped at a multi-vehicle accident and rendered life-saving care to 2 critical patients until EMS arrived. That's exactly what Good Samaritan laws protect me to do." Williams examined the cards he slid across the table. Driver's license, medical license, hospital ID. "These could be forged," she said. Isaiah didn't flinch. "Call the hospital," he replied. "Ask the operator to verify my position. This will take 3 minutes. You've already wasted more than an hour." Williams hesitated. Then she picked up the phone, and with one call, everything was about to unravel. While Isaiah sat in custody waiting for the truth to catch up, the consequences of his absence were already unfolding at Memorial Regional Medical Center. At Chapta Census Prezice. M. The unconscious woman from the Honda Civic was rushed into Trauma Bay 1. Her name was Emma Richardson. Blood still matted her hair where someone, whoever it was, had controlled the bleeding long enough to keep her alive. Dr. Monica Bradford, the attending emergency physician on duty, took over. As the trauma team worked, she noted something immediately. The wound care was textbook. Direct pressure had been applied correctly. The bleeding had been controlled long enough to prevent hemorrhagic shock. Spinal precautions had been respected. Whoever had treated this patient at the scene knew exactly what they were doing. This was done by a professional, Bradford said quietly. Minutes later, in the adjacent bay, Michael Torres was being evaluated for severe chest pain. Tests confirmed an acute myocardial infarction, a heart attack, one that could have turned fatal before EMS arrived if he had panicked or exerted himself. Both patients were alive, both because of the same unidentified person at the roadside. The paramedics documented their report. Civilian on scene provided effective pre-hospital care, maintained hemorrhage control, recognized cardiac emergency, appropriate interventions prior to EMS arrival. No one at the hospital yet realized the civilian was their own department chief at Opt 0 p.m. Doctor. Bradford tried to call Isaiah to consult on another case. No answer. Unusual. He always answered. She called his wife instead. And in that moment, as phones rang unanswered and questions mounted, the hospital began to realize something was wrong. Very wrong. By the time Detective Williams ended the phone call, the room felt different. She looked up at Isaiah slowly. The color had drained from her face. Memorial Regional Medical Center confirms, she said carefully, that Dr. Isaiah Carter is their chief of emergency medicine. There was no triumph in Isaiah's expression, no relief, only exhaustion and controlled anger. I told you that an hour ago, he said. I showed my license. I asked you to verify it at the scene. You could have done this in 3 minutes. Williams didn't argue. There was nothing to argue with. At Opt 2 p.m. Isaiah's wife, Dr. Nicole Carter, arrived at the barracks, still wearing her hospital scrubs. A pediatric surgeon. She recognized the smell of dried blood immediately when she saw him. This is my husband, she said sharply. Why is he in handcuffs? Isaiah was released without charges. No apology, no explanation. Just the quiet acknowledgement that a catastrophic mistake had been made. Weeks later, attorneys would reconstruct the timeline in painful detail. Body camera footage showed Isaiah identifying himself as a doctor within seconds of police arrival. Witness videos showed bystanders confirming his actions. Medical records proved both patients survived because of his care. The legal conclusion was unavoidable. A licensed physician had been arrested for providing life-saving emergency care he was legally protected to provide. The lawsuit moved quickly. There was no defense to mount. 14 months later, the state agreed to a $5.6 million settlement, one of the largest of its kind. But no amount of money could buy back the hour Isaiah spent in handcuffs while his patients arrived at his hospital without him. The settlement didn't just come with a check. It came with consequences. Trooper David Mitchell was suspended for 6 months without pay. His personnel file permanently marked. Any chance of promotion effectively over. Mandatory retraining ordered not just on procedure, but on Good Samaritan laws and how to recognize licensed medical professionals outside of hospital settings. Trooper Sarah Connolly received a 90-day suspension and a formal reprimand. Detective Williams was issued a written reprimand for delaying verification when it was offered repeatedly. The state was forced to change its policies. New protocols required officers to immediately verify professional credentials when presented, rather than detain first and ask questions later. A direct liaison was established with regional hospitals so off-duty physicians could be confirmed in minutes. Training on Good Samaritan protections became mandatory. On paper, accountability had arrived. But the deeper issue was never about policy manuals. It was about perception. Because at no point did Isaiah Carter lack credibility. He had the license. He had the training. He had the results. 2 living patients. What he lacked was the right appearance. He wasn't wearing scrubs. He wasn't in a hospital. He wasn't white. And that was enough for his expertise to be treated as a threat instead of a gift. 15 years of medical experience couldn't outweigh a split-second assumption about who looked like a doctor. That assumption is what put the handcuffs on. And that assumption still exists. Emma Richardson left the hospital 3 days later. 40 stitches closed the wound in her scalp. Doctors confirmed she had suffered a severe concussion and a mild traumatic brain injury, but no permanent neurological damage. In her chart, one line stood out. Patient received excellent pre-hospital care. Prolonged hemorrhage control prevented likely fatal blood loss. Michael Torres survived his heart attack as well. A blocked artery was opened with a stent. Cardiologists later testified that keeping him calm and immobile at the scene likely prevented sudden cardiac arrest before EMS arrived. Both patients lived. Both testified, under oath, that Dr. Isaiah Carter saved their lives. Isaiah still stops when he sees accidents. He still kneels on asphalt. He still presses his hands into wounds and holds people at the edge of death until help arrives. But now, he keeps a white coat folded in the trunk of his car. Not because it makes him a better doctor, because it makes other people believe him faster. This case wasn't about a misunderstanding. It wasn't about confusion in a chaotic moment. It was about how quickly authority is granted or denied based on what someone looks like. On Interstate 85, that night, saving a life became suspicious activity. Expertise became irrelevant. And a man whose job was to run an emergency department was treated like a criminal for doing exactly what he was trained to do. The $5. $6 million settlement forced reforms. It punished officers. It changed policies. But it couldn't undo the truth at the center of this story. That even when a black man shows his credentials, explains his expertise, saves lives with his own hands, he can still be handcuffed first and believed later. This is the story of Dr. Isaiah Carter, Chief of Emergency Medicine, arrested for being a doctor while saving a life.